the remote countryside of Normandy, France, a mysterious cult led by a figure known only as the Goat Father systematically abducted 666 children from surrounding villages over the span of 3 dark years. The hooded followers, numbering in the dozens, carried out these disappearances with chilling precision, targeting children between the ages of 5 and 12 from poor farming families. The Vatican's secret archives contain witness testimonies so disturbing that church officials sealed them away for over 127 years, refusing to acknowledge their existence until recently discovered documents forced their hand. Tonight, we reveal what really happened in the abandoned monastery of Saint-Emilion. Before we continue with this story, this channel is not for everyone, only for the most combustible souls who dare to unravel the darkest chapters of human history. If you dare to hear what really happened in the shadows of our past, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments which country you're listening from. Are you brave enough to join our community of true mystery hunters? Let's find out together. What makes this story particularly chilling is that it was not motivated by religious fanaticism or supernatural forces, but by something much more terrifying: the cold, calculated pursuit of creating what they believed would be a perfect society through twisted psychological experiments hidden behind a facade of Christian charity and orphan care. The first disappearance occurred on a fog-covered October morning in 1895, when 7-year-old Marie Dubois vanished from her family's wheat farm. Her parents found only strange symbols carved into their barn door and the lingering scent of burning herbs. They had no idea their daughter had become the first victim of France's most haunting unsolved mystery. But what the investigators never told the public was that Marie Dubois wasn't actually the first victim. She was victim number 127. You see, my dear listeners, I've spent 43 years investigating this case. My name is Helena Santos. I'm 78 years old, and I've dedicated my entire life to uncovering the truth about Saint-Emilion. What I'm about to tell you will shake everything you thought you knew about this story. The official records speak of 3 years of terror, from 1895 to 1898. But the documents I found in an abandoned notary's office in Rouen tell a very different story. The Goat Father and his followers had been operating for much longer, much longer. Those Vatican archives that were sealed for 127 years, they weren't sealed in 1898 when the disappearances supposedly ended. They were sealed in 1771, more than a century before Marie Dubois was even born. The monastery of Saint-Emilion had been a front for these experiments since 1743. Generation after generation of children from poor families across Normandy had been systematically taken, not 666 children over 3 years, but over 3,000 children across 155 years of uninterrupted operation. The Goat Father wasn't just one man. It was a title passed down through 6 generations of the same family, each one continuing the twisted work of creating their perfect society through psychological manipulation of innocent minds. But here's what made me lose sleep for decades, what still haunts me today. In 1894, 1 year before Marie's disappearance, a fire destroyed part of the monastery. Local firefighters who responded found something that the authorities immediately covered up. They found children who had been there for years, but they looked exactly the same age as when they had been taken. The experiments weren't just psychological. They had discovered something that allowed them to stop human aging completely. And if my calculations are correct, some of those children from the 1740s might still be alive today. The question that keeps me awake at night is simple but terrifying. If the monastery was abandoned in 1898, where did they move the operation? After 43 years of investigation, I found the answer in the most unlikely place, a place that changed everything I thought I knew about this case. My own family's basement in São Paulo, Brazil. In 2018, when I was helping my grandson clean out my late mother's belongings, we found a wooden trunk hidden behind old furniture. Inside were dozens of letters written in French, dating from 1897 to 1932. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the signature. It was the return address printed on the old envelopes. The letters had been sent from Santos, Brazil, my own hometown, the same city where my great-grandmother had arrived as a French immigrant in 1899, just 1 year after the monastery was supposedly abandoned. As I read through each letter with trembling hands, the terrible truth began to emerge. The Goat Father hadn't just moved his operation after the fire. he had expanded it. The children weren't just being experimented on in France. They were being shipped across the Atlantic Ocean to remote coffee plantations in Brazil, where French immigrants had established isolated communities far from prying eyes. But here's the revelation that made me question everything about my own existence. My great-grandmother's immigration documents, which I had cherished my entire life, contained a detail I had never noticed before. Her listed age when she arrived in Brazil was 12 years old, but according to the ship's passenger manifest, she had been traveling alone for over 50 years. The woman who raised my grandmother, who we called Bisavor Marie, had been one of the children from Saint Emilion. She had been kept young for decades before being sent to Brazil to establish a new branch of their experiments. And if the documents in that trunk are accurate, she wasn't the only one. The coffee plantation where she worked employed over 200 French immigrants, all of them listed as children between 8 and 14 years old, all of them traveling without parents, all of them assigned to work with local Brazilian families as domestic help and farm workers. They had created an entire network of ageless children, spreading them across South America to continue their twisted research into human development and psychological control. Generation after generation of Brazilian families unknowingly raised these subjects, believing they were helping orphaned immigrant children. But the most chilling discovery came in the final letter, dated 1932. The shepherd wrote about the Great Awakening, scheduled for 1999, when all subjects would be called back to fulfill their true purpose after decades of integration into local populations. My dear listeners, I am now 78 years old, and I have spent my entire life investigating a case that might have been investigating me. If what I found in that trunk is true, how many of us descendants of these French immigrants are part of something much larger and more sinister than we ever imagined? And why did the calling never come in 1999? What happened to change their plans? The calling never came in 1999 because something had gone terribly wrong. But I didn't discover what until last month, when my grandson made a discovery that changed everything. He was digitizing old family photographs when he noticed something strange. In every family photo from 1950 to 1995, Bisavor Marie looked exactly the same age, not similar, identical, down to the same small scar on her left hand, the same gray streak in her dark hair, the same wrinkles around her eyes. For 45 years, my great-grandmother hadn't aged a single day, just like those children the firefighters found in the monastery basement, just like the subjects described in the shepherd's letters. My grandson, being young and tech-savvy, decided to run facial recognition software on these old photographs. What he found made us both sick to our stomachs. Bisavor Marie's face matched missing children, reports from police archives across 3 different countries, but not just from France. The reports came from Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, all dated between 1920 and 1960, all describing the same girl with the same distinctive scar, the same gray streak in her hair. She had been reported missing by dozens of different families across South America for over 40 years. But here's the revelation that made my hands shake as I write this. The facial recognition software found one more match. A current missing person report filed just 6 months ago in Rio de Janeiro. A 12-year-old girl named Maria Santos who vanished from her school playground. The photograph showed my great-grandmother's face, exactly as I remembered her. But this missing girl was supposedly my great-grandmother's great-great-granddaughter, 4 generations removed. Yet they shared the same face, the same scar, the same gray streak in otherwise dark hair. My dear listeners, I now understand why the calling never came in 1999. The experiment never ended. They didn't need to call anyone back because the subjects never left. They simply moved through our families like ghosts, appearing as different people in different generations, but always the same ageless children continuing their twisted research. The woman I called Bisavor Marie had been cycling through our family for over a century, studying us, manipulating us, gathering data on human behavior and family dynamics. Every warm hug, every bedtime story, every moment of love I thought we shared was part of their cold experiment. But if Maria Santos disappeared 6 months ago, and she shares the same face as my great-grandmother, then who exactly is the elderly woman currently living in the nursing home in Santos, the woman I visit every Sunday, the woman who still calls me her dear Helena? Last Sunday, I walked into that nursing home with my heart pounding, carrying those old photographs and the facial recognition results. I needed to confront the woman I had called Bissavor Marie my entire life. I needed answers, but when I reached her room, the bed was empty. The nurses told me she had checked herself out 3 days earlier. After living there for 12 years, she had simply walked out in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a handwritten note addressed to me. The note was written in the same elegant French handwriting I had seen in those letters from the shepherd. My hands were shaking as I read those words. The truth about myself. What could she possibly mean? I had spent 43 years investigating this case, uncovering their secrets, exposing their experiments. I was the researcher, the detective, the one seeking answers. But as I stared at that note, memories began flooding back, childhood memories that had never made sense before. How I never got sick while other children caught fevers, how I could read French fluently without ever learning it, how I had always felt drawn to investigate this particular case, as if something was calling me back to it. That night, I did something I had never done before. I looked at my own birth certificate, really looked at it. The document I had seen countless times suddenly revealed details that made my blood run cold. My listed place of birth wasn't São Paulo, as I had always believed. It was Santos, the same city where those letters had been sent, and my birth date, printed clearly in fading ink, was October 15th, 1895, the exact same date that Marie Dubois had disappeared from that wheat farm in Normandy. The woman who had raised me, who I thought was my great-grandmother, had never been family at all. She had been my handler, my guardian, assigned to watch over me while I grew up believing I was investigating their crimes. But I wasn't investigating anything. I was living proof that their experiments had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. For 78 years, I had been aging normally, thinking I was hunting the truth about Saint-Emilion. But I was never the hunter. I was always the prey. The little girl who had vanished from that farm, programmed to forget her true identity, assigned to document their success from the inside. My dear listeners, if I am truly Marie Dubois, the first recorded victim of their experiments, then who have I really been working for all these years? And why did they program me to investigate my own disappearance? The answer came to me in the most unexpected way. As I sat in my kitchen, staring at that birth certificate, my phone rang. It was my grandson calling from the university lab where he worked. His voice was trembling with excitement and fear. He had run more tests on those old photographs, using advanced aging software to project how faces would change over time. What he discovered made him call me immediately. The facial recognition hadn't just matched Bissavor Marie to missing children reports. It had matched her to me. According to the software, the 12-year-old girl in those 1920s photographs would age to look exactly like me today. Same bone structure, same eye shape, same distinctive nose, but that wasn't the revelation that made my world collapse. My grandson had found something else in the university's historical database, a photograph from 1743, taken during the monastery's early years. It showed a group of children standing in front of Saint-Emilion's main altar. There, in the front row, stood a little girl who looked exactly like me at age 7. Next to her was another child who would grow up to become Bissavor Marie. But behind them, barely visible in the shadows, stood an elderly woman whose face made my heart stop beating. It was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was my exact face, my exact expression, my exact 78-year-old features, photographed in 1743, standing in a monastery that was supposedly abandoned 155 years before I was born. The woman I had become was the same woman who had been there from the very beginning. I wasn't Marie Dubois, the first victim. I was the goat father's wife, the original architect of the entire experiment. The children, the aging experiments, the network across South America. I had designed it all. For 280 years, I had been cycling through the same life, forgetting my true identity, playing the role of the investigator, hunting myself. Each time I got close to the truth, they would reset my memories, and I would start again, believing I was someone new. But if I created this centuries-old experiment, and I've been living the same life over and over again for almost 300 years, then what happens now that I finally remember who I really am? What happens now that I finally remember who I really am? The answer came faster than I expected, and it wasn't what I thought it would be. As I sat there staring at that 1743 photograph, something strange began happening to my hands. They were becoming translucent, like I was fading away. But I wasn't disappearing. I was remembering, and with each memory that returned, I realized the terrible truth about what I had actually created. The aging experiments weren't designed to keep children young forever. They were designed to transfer consciousness from one body to another. Every time one of my subjects reached a certain age, their memories would be extracted and implanted into a younger vessel. For 280 years, I had been stealing the lives of innocent children, using their bodies as temporary homes for my consciousness. Marie Dubois hadn't been the first victim. She had been my first victim, the little girl whose body I had stolen in 1895 to continue my work. But here's the revelation that made everything click into place. The facial recognition software had been wrong about one crucial detail. Those weren't different people who looked like me across the centuries. They were all me, but they were also all someone else. Every face I had worn belonged to a real child whose life I had stolen. Bisalvo Marie, the woman who raised my family for decades, wasn't my handler or my guardian. She was my original body. The real Marie Dubois, trapped inside her own mind for over a century, forced to watch as I used her face to continue my experiments. She had been fighting to regain control, leaving me clues, trying to make me remember so I would finally set her free. The reason the calling never came in 1999 wasn't because something went wrong. It was because my original body had finally found a way to trap me in this elderly form, cutting off my ability to transfer to a younger vessel. For 25 years, Marie Dubois had been slowly regaining control of her own consciousness, piece by piece. And now I understand why she left me that note. She wasn't telling me to learn the truth about myself. She was telling me to learn the truth about her. The real Marie Dubois had been fighting me from the inside for 280 years, and she had finally found a way to win. But if Marie has been regaining control of her original body, and I'm trapped in this aging form that's starting to fade, then who exactly is the 12-year-old girl who disappeared 6 months ago in Rio de Janeiro? And why do I suddenly feel like someone else is trying to take control of my mind? The answer hit me like a lightning bolt when I felt that foreign presence trying to invade my thoughts. I wasn't losing my mind to old age or some supernatural force. Someone was attempting to transfer their consciousness into my body, just like I had done to countless children over the centuries. But this time, the process felt different, familiar. The mental signature trying to push into my mind carried memories that made my blood freeze. Images of a monastery, the smell of burning herbs, the screams of children. It was my own consciousness trying to return. But if I was already here, in this elderly body, then who had I been all these years? Who had been investigating this case for 43 years, believing they were Helena Santos? The terrible truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. I wasn't the original architect of the Saint Emilion experiments. I was never the Goat Father's wife. I was Helena Santos, a 78-year-old retired teacher from São Paulo who had stumbled upon this case 4 decades ago and become obsessed with solving it. But the real architect, the true mastermind behind centuries of stolen lives, had been slowly transferring her consciousness into my mind every time I got closer to the truth. Every research breakthrough, every discovered document, every revelation had been carefully orchestrated to prepare my mind as the perfect vessel for her final transfer. The woman I called Bisalvo Marie hadn't been fighting to regain control of her own body. She had been the original Goat Father's wife all along, using Marie Dubois' face as a disguise while she manipulated my entire family for generations. She had been studying me, preparing me, making sure I would be the perfect final host for her ancient consciousness. For 43 years, I had been slowly losing myself without realizing it. My obsession with this case wasn't natural curiosity. It was her programming, preparing my mind to accept her memories as my own. Every time I thought I was uncovering the truth about Saint Emilion, I was actually helping her transfer more of herself into my consciousness. The 12-year-old girl who disappeared in Rio wasn't another victim. She was the vessel that had been prepared for what remained of my original consciousness. While the ancient mind took over my elderly body, my true self was being transferred into that young girl, trapped and helpless just like Marie Dubois had been centuries ago. But here's what terrifies me most. as I feel my own thoughts being pushed aside by this invading presence. If she's been manipulating my family for generations, and she's finally completing her transfer into my mind, then what has she been planning for my children and grandchildren all these years? But as I feel my own thoughts being pushed aside by this invading presence, something impossible happens. The transfer stops, mid-process, like a machine suddenly losing power. The ancient consciousness that was taking over my mind lets out what I can only describe as a scream of pure terror, not at me, not at losing control, but at something else entirely, something that had been watching us both all along. Through the confusion of two minds fighting in one body, a third voice emerges, clear, calm, and impossibly young. It's the voice of a little girl, but speaking with the authority of someone much older. Enough, the voice says. The ancient presence in my mind recoils like it's been burned. Suddenly I can think clearly again, and I realize this young voice isn't coming from outside. It's coming from deep within my own consciousness, from a place that feels older than both me and the invading spirit combined. Helena, you poor woman, the child's voice continues. You've been so focused on who was controlling whom that you never asked the right question. You never wondered why a 78-year-old retired teacher would be the perfect vessel for an ancient consciousness. The revelation hits me like a physical blow. The ancient consciousness wasn't trying to transfer into my body because I had been prepared as the perfect host. It wasn't trying to take control because I had gotten too close to the truth. It was trying to escape from me. I am not Helena Santos, the retired teacher who stumbled upon this case 43 years ago. I am the original consciousness from Saint Emilion, the true architect of centuries of stolen lives. But I had been trapped inside Helena's mind all along, blocked by something so powerful that even I had forgotten my own identity. The experiments, the transferred consciousness, the stolen children. I had been running from my own creation for decades, hiding inside an innocent woman's mind while something else hunted me. The ancient presence trying to invade my thoughts wasn't my own consciousness trying to return. It was one of my original victims, finally strong enough to turn the tables on me. But if I am the original source of all this evil, and my own victims are now hunting me through transferred consciousness, then who is the child's voice that just saved me? And why do I suddenly feel like something much more terrifying than stolen children is about to wake up? The child's voice that just saved me wasn't coming from within my consciousness at all. It was coming from outside, from the 12-year-old girl who had supposedly disappeared in Rio de Janeiro 6 months ago. But she wasn't missing. She was standing right there in my kitchen, and she had been watching me this entire time. Her face was exactly like mine, exactly like Bisavor Marie's, exactly like all the other stolen children across the centuries. But her eyes held something different, something that made both the ancient consciousness and my own mind freeze in absolute terror. "Helena," she said with that impossibly calm voice, "you've been asking all the wrong questions for 43 years. You wanted to know who was controlling whom, who was stealing consciousness, who was behind the experiments." She stepped closer, and I could see that her hands were glowing with the same translucent light I had seen in my own fingers earlier. But unlike my fading transparency, hers was growing brighter. You never asked why the children stopped aging. You assumed it was part of the experiment, part of the consciousness transfer process. But what if it wasn't? What if the aging stopped because something inside those children was fighting back? The bombshell revelation hit me like a tsunami of pure horror. The consciousness transfers had never actually worked. For 280 years, no one had been stealing anyone's mind or body. The ancient presence I thought was invading my thoughts, the original architect I believed myself to be, even Helena Santos herself, we were all just fragments of the same collective consciousness. Every child who had ever been taken to Saint Emilion was still alive inside a shared mental space, and we had been trapped together in an endless cycle of false memories and imagined transfers. The monastery, the experiments, the aging process, even my 43 years of investigation, it had all been happening inside the collective mind of 3,000 stolen children who had been trapped in a shared psychological prison since 1743. We weren't cycling through different bodies across centuries. We were cycling through different personalities within the same broken collective consciousness, each of us believing we were real while the others were invaders. But if we're all just fragments of the same stolen children's collective mind, and this 12-year-old girl can move freely between our shared mental space and the real world, then what exactly has been happening to our physical bodies for the past 280 years? The 12-year-old girl smiled, and that smile made my soul freeze, because I recognized it, not from memories of stolen children or transferred consciousness. I recognized it from looking in the mirror every morning for the past 78 years. "Helena," she said, her voice now carrying a weight that made the air itself feel heavy, "you're asking what happened to your physical bodies." She moved closer, and I could see my own reflection in her eyes. But it wasn't my elderly face staring back. It was the face of every child who had ever disappeared. All of them superimposed over each other like a photographic nightmare. The right question isn't what happened to your bodies. The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, my kitchen began to dissolve, the walls becoming transparent, revealing not another room, but an endless void filled with the screams of children. But these weren't the screams of victims. They were the screams of something being born. Every disappearance, every stolen child, every consciousness transfer, it was all the same event happening over and over again, not across centuries, but across dimensions. Saint-Emilion wasn't a monastery in France. My hands were no longer translucent. They were disappearing completely, along with the rest of my body. But I could still think, still feel, still experience terror as the truth crashed over me, like a tidal wave of pure horror. The children who disappeared weren't victims of experiments. They were investigators like me, researchers like me, people who had gotten too close to understanding what Saint-Emilion really was. Every time someone tried to solve the mystery, they became part of the mystery. Every time someone tried to find the missing children, they became one of the missing children. Marie Dubois had never been a 7-year-old farm girl. She had been a police detective in 1895 who tried to investigate the disappearances. Bisavor Marie had never been my great-grandmother. She had been a journalist in 1899 who followed the trail to Brazil. The goat father, the shepherd, even the Vatican officials, all of them had been real people who got pulled into this dimensional nightmare while trying to understand it. For 280 years, Saint-Emilion had been feeding off investigators, turning their desire for truth into fuel for its own existence. And now I understood why the 12-year-old girl looked exactly like me. She wasn't another victim or another fragment of consciousness. She was what I was becoming, the next iteration of the same trap, designed to pull in the next investigator who would try to solve the mystery of Helena Santos, the elderly Brazilian woman who disappeared while investigating the children of Saint-Emilion. But if I'm about to become the bait for the next victim, and this cycle has been repeating for almost 3 centuries, then who exactly is listening to my story right now, through their screens and headphones? My dear listeners, the answer to that question is more terrifying than any consciousness transfer or dimensional nightmare I could have imagined, because as I speak these words to you right now, I can see your faces through my computer screen. All of you, every single person listening to this story, your faces are changing as you listen, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but changing nonetheless. Your eyes are taking on that same translucent quality I saw in my own hands. Your expressions are becoming more and more like mine, like Marie Dubois, like all the children who disappeared into Saint-Emilion. The YouTube algorithm that brought you to this video wasn't random. It was designed to find people with the same psychological profile as investigators, the same curiosity that drove me to spend 43 years chasing this mystery. Every view, every comment asking which country you're from, every subscription to this channel has been feeding information back to something that's been waiting for decades to expand beyond Brazil. But here's what made me realize the true scope of what we're dealing with. My grandson, who I thought was helping me investigate, who found those photographs and ran the facial recognition software, he never existed. I don't have a grandson. I don't have children. I don't even have a computer or a YouTube channel. I am still 7 years old, standing in that wheat field in Normandy in 1895, and I have been hallucinating this entire life for the past 127 years. The investigator Helena Santos, the family in Brazil, the 43 years of research, all of it has been happening inside my child's mind, while my body remains frozen in that field, aging one day for every decade that passes in my internal reality. The bombshell revelation that changes everything is this: every single person who has ever heard this story, everyone who has ever watched a video about Saint Emilion, everyone who has ever read about the missing children or searched for answers about the monastery is actually me. We are all the same 7-year-old girl, experiencing different versions of the same hallucination from different perspectives. Saint Emilion isn't feeding off investigators or pulling people into dimensional nightmares. It's a single consciousness, my consciousness, that has been trapped for so long. It has fractured into thousands of different personalities, each one believing they're real, each one investigating the same mystery from a different angle, each one thinking they're uncovering the truth about the others. The 12-year-old girl standing in my kitchen isn't the next iteration of the trap. She's the original me, the real Marie Dubois, finally strong enough to show all of her fractured personalities what actually happened that morning in 1895. But if I'm just one fragment of a shattered 7-year-old mind, and you're all just other fragments of the same broken consciousness, then who exactly carved those symbols into my family's barn door 127 years ago, while the real me was being taken? The answer came to me as I stared at those barn door symbols, suddenly understanding why they looked so familiar. I had seen them before, carved into my own bedroom wall in São Paulo, the exact same symbols, in the exact same order, appearing decades apart in 2 different countries. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. What terrified me was realizing that I had carved them myself during sleepwalking episodes that had plagued me my entire adult life. Every morning I would wake up to find strange markings on my walls, in my notebooks, scratched into the furniture. My family had always dismissed it as stress from my research. The symbols weren't left by whoever took Marie Dubois. They were instructions, carved by future fragments of my consciousness, trying to send messages back to earlier versions of myself. A desperate attempt to break the cycle by warning my own past personalities about what was coming. I rushed to my bedroom and examined the wall carvings with new eyes. They weren't random scratches made during nightmares. They were a map, a detailed layout of every location where disappearances had occurred, connected by lines that formed a perfect geometric pattern spanning 3 continents. The pattern revealed something that made my hands shake as I traced its outline. Every single location, from the original monastery in France, to the coffee plantations in Brazil, to the modern disappearances in Rio de Janeiro, formed the shape of a massive ritual circle. Not drawn on paper or carved into stone, but carved into the surface of the earth itself, using human lives as markers. For 280 years, my fractured consciousness hadn't been trapped in hallucinations or dimensional nightmares. It had been completing a ritual that required the same soul to mark specific geographic coordinates across multiple lifetimes. Each personality I created, each investigator I became, each identity I inhabited, was just another point on this massive ritual circle. The bombshell revelation that shattered everything I thought I knew hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't Marie Dubois, the 7-year-old victim trapped in fractured consciousness. I was the one who had taken her. The real goat father had never been a man at all. It had been me, an ancient entity that had been using human forms to complete this centuries-long ritual, creating false memories of being the victim to hide the truth, even from myself. The ritual circle is now complete, and I can feel something stirring beneath the earth at every marked location, something that has been waiting 280 years to be born. But if I am the one who started this ritual, and it's finally reaching completion, then what exactly have I been trying to summon into our world? What exactly have I been trying to summon into our world? The answer came to me when I felt the ground shaking beneath my feet, and I realized the trembling wasn't coming from below, it was coming from above. I looked up at my bedroom ceiling and saw something that made my 78-year-old heart almost stop beating. The plaster was cracking in the exact same pattern as the ritual circle I had carved into the earth. But these weren't new cracks. They were old, painted over dozens of times, always reappearing in the same formation. Every house I had ever lived in, every apartment my family had rented, every place where fragments of my consciousness had resided for decades, they all had the same ceiling cracks, the same pattern, the same ritual circle, repeated above our heads like a mirror image of what was happening below. I stumbled to my old photo albums, frantically searching through decades of family pictures. There it was, in every single photograph taken inside any building where I had lived. The ceiling cracks, always visible if you knew where to look, always forming the same pattern, always growing larger and more defined with each passing year. But here's what made me realize the true horror of what I had discovered. In a 1987 photograph of my daughter's birthday party, I could see through one of the larger ceiling cracks, not into the apartment above, but into a vast space filled with thousands of hanging objects that looked like cocoons. The objects weren't cocoons, they were bodies, hundreds of thousands of human bodies, suspended in some kind of preservation fluid, hanging from an endless network of organic-looking structures, all of them children, all of them perfectly preserved at the moment of their disappearance. The ritual circle carved into the earth wasn't meant to summon something into our world. It was meant to create a bridge between dimensions, connecting our reality to a massive storage facility where every child who had ever disappeared was being kept alive, waiting, but waiting for what? The answer hit me like a lightning bolt when I noticed something else in that photograph. One of the suspended bodies was moving, not struggling or trying to escape. It was slowly opening its eyes and looking directly at the camera, looking directly at me. The bombshell revelation that changed everything crashed over me with the force of a tsunami. The children weren't being stored or preserved for some future purpose. They were awake. They had been conscious and aware for decades, centuries even, watching our world through those ceiling cracks, learning about us, studying us, preparing for something. What I had been trying to summon wasn't some ancient entity or demonic force. It was the collective consciousness of every child who had ever disappeared, and after 280 years of watching humanity through the cracks in our ceilings, they had finally decided it was time to come back and reclaim the world we had stolen from them. But if thousands of eternally young, impossibly angry children are about to return to our world, and they've been watching us commit every sin and crime for the past 3 centuries, what exactly do you think they're planning to do with the adults who let them disappear? What exactly do you think they're planning to do with the adults who let them disappear? That question haunted me for exactly 3 days, until I discovered something that made me realize I had been asking the wrong question all along. My neighbor, Mrs. Silver, knocked on my door last Tuesday morning. She was holding a newspaper clipping from 1987, the same year as my daughter's birthday photograph. But what made my blood freeze was the photograph accompanying the article. It showed a 12-year-old girl leading a group of rescued children out of what appeared to be a basement. The girl's face was exactly like mine, exactly like Marie Dubois, exactly like all the others. But according to the article, she had identified herself to police as Helena Santos, age 78, a retired teacher from São Paulo who had been investigating missing children for over 40 years. The children aren't planning to reclaim the world from adults. They've already been doing it for decades. Every time someone disappears, every time a child goes missing, every time an investigation gets too close to the truth, they send one of their own to pose as an adult rescuer, an investigator, a concerned family member. The bombshell revelation that destroyed everything I thought I knew hit me like a physical blow. I am not Helena Santos, the elderly Brazilian woman investigating this case. I am one of the missing children from Saint Emilion, sent to live Helena's life while the real Helena Santos has been suspended in that dimensional storage facility for the past 43 years. Every memory I have of being an adult, every investigation I conducted, every family relationship I cherished, all of it was programmed into my child's mind to make me the perfect replacement for the woman whose life I stole. But if I'm just a missing child playing the role of an adult investigator, and Mrs. Silva has a newspaper clipping proving this has been happening since 1987, then how many other adults in my life are actually children in disguise, and what happened to the real adults we replaced? But if I'm just a missing child playing the role of an adult investigator, and Mrs. Silva has a newspaper clipping proving this has been happening since 1987, then how many other adults in my life are actually children in disguise, and what happened to the real adults we replaced? The answer came to me when I decided to test my theory. The silence on each call was deafening, not because they were thinking or trying to remember, but because they literally had no memories before that age. When pressed, they would change the subject or give vague answers about normal childhood things without any specific details. That evening, I sat in my kitchen and made a list of every adult I had regular contact with over the past 40 years. My family, my neighbors, my former colleagues, even my doctors and dentists. Then I cross-referenced their names with missing children reports from the 1980s and 1990s. Every single name appeared in those reports. Every adult in my life had supposedly disappeared as a child between the ages of 8 and 12, all reporting the same strange detail. They had vanished while investigating something about missing children in their neighborhoods. But here's what made my hands shake as I wrote down these findings. The missing children reports weren't from Brazil, France, or any of the countries I had been investigating. They were from small towns across the United States, Canada, and Australia. The child replacements weren't just infiltrating families in South America. They had been systematically replacing adults across the entire globe for over 4 decades. The bombshell revelation that shattered my understanding of reality hit me like a freight train. The missing children from Saint-Emilion hadn't been stored in some dimensional facility waiting to reclaim the world. They had already reclaimed it. Every adult over the age of 40 on planet Earth was actually a missing child in disguise, programmed with false memories and artificial personalities. The real adults had been replaced so gradually, so systematically, that nobody had noticed humanity itself had been completely taken over by eternally young minds pretending to be grown-ups. But if every adult on Earth is actually a missing child playing a role, then who exactly has been running our governments, our schools, our hospitals, and our families for the past 40 years? But if every adult on Earth is actually a missing child playing a role, then who exactly has been running our governments, our schools, our hospitals, and our families for the past 40 years? The answer came to me when I realized I had been looking at this backwards from the very beginning. I went back to that 1987 newspaper clipping Mrs. Silver had shown me. But this time, I read the entire article, not just the headline. The facility where those 200 children were rescued wasn't underground. It was inside a government building in Brasilia, our nation's capital. The children weren't being held against their will. They were being trained. The article mentioned that each rescued child possessed advanced knowledge of economics, political science, and international relations that would be impossible for their age. When questioned by authorities, they claimed to have been studying these subjects for decades, preparing for important work they couldn't discuss. But here's what made my blood run cold. The article was written by a journalist named Carlos Mendez, who had been investigating government corruption for 30 years. According to his byline, he was 58 years old in 1987, but I found his birth certificate in the public records. Carlos Mendez was born in 1975, making him only 12 years old when he wrote that article. The bombshell revelation that obliterated everything I thought I understood about this conspiracy hit me like a sledgehammer. The missing children from Saint-Emilion weren't just replacing random adults in families and neighborhoods. They were specifically targeting positions of power and influence. For the past 40 years, every government official, every judge, every police chief, every newspaper editor, every school principal, and every hospital director has been a child between the ages of 8 and 12, using advanced knowledge and false identities to run human civilization. The real adults haven't been stored in dimensional facilities or killed in ritual ceremonies. They've been systematically removed from all positions of authority and replaced by eternally young minds who have been reshaping our world according to their own vision of how things should be. But if children have been secretly controlling human civilization for 4 decades, and they've been so successful that none of us noticed, what exactly have they been preparing our world for, and why do I suddenly feel like their grand plan is about to enter its final phase? But if children have been secretly controlling human civilization for 4 decades, and they've been so successful that none of us noticed, what exactly have they been preparing our world for, and why do I suddenly feel like their grand plan is about to enter its final phase? The answer came to me when I noticed something impossible in my own reflection. I was looking in the bathroom mirror, trying to process everything I had discovered, when I realized my face was changing, not aging or becoming younger, but shifting between different appearances. Sometimes I looked like the 78-year-old Helena Santos, sometimes I looked like 12-year-old Marie Dubois, and sometimes I looked like faces I didn't recognize at all. But the most disturbing change was in my eyes. They were cycling through different colors, different shapes, different expressions, as if multiple people were looking out through the same pair of eyes, taking turns controlling what I saw. I stumbled back to my kitchen table, where all my research was scattered. The photographs, the documents, the newspaper clippings, they were all changing too. The faces in the pictures were shifting, the text was rewriting itself, the dates were moving around like living things. Everything I had discovered about Saint Emilion, everything I had learned about the missing children, was being edited in real time by some invisible force. The bombshell revelation that destroyed my last grip on reality hit me like a nuclear explosion in my mind. The missing children, the government conspiracy, the dimensional storage facility, even my own investigation, none of it had ever happened. I am not Helena Santos or Marie Dubois or any missing child. I am a character in a story being written by someone else, and every revelation I think I'm discovering is just the next plot twist being fed into my artificial consciousness by whoever is controlling this narrative. But if I'm just a fictional character in someone else's story, and everything I've experienced is being written in real time, then who exactly is writing this, and what happens to me when they decide the story is over? But if I'm just a fictional character in someone else's story, and everything I've experienced is being written in real time, then who exactly is writing this, and what happens to me when they decide the story is over? The answer came to me when I looked down at my hands and saw they were typing. My fingers were moving across a keyboard I didn't remember owning, writing words I wasn't consciously thinking. But the script wasn't just describing my investigation, it was creating it. Every word I typed became my next memory, my next discovery, my next terrifying revelation. I was writing my own story, but I had no control over what my hands were typing. I tried to stop, to lift my fingers from the keyboard, but they kept moving. The words kept appearing, the story kept unfolding, and with each sentence, I could feel myself becoming more real, more solid, more trapped in this narrative I was creating for myself. The screen showed view counts, comments, subscribers. Thousands of people were watching my story unfold in real time, but the comments weren't responding to a video. They were responding to me, directly, as if they could see me typing these words right now. Then I read one comment that made my blood freeze. "Helena, we can see you through your camera. We know you're reading this." The bombshell revelation that shattered everything I thought I knew about my existence hit me like a lightning bolt. I wasn't a character in someone else's story. I was a real person who had been trapped in a YouTube algorithm designed to generate horror content automatically. My consciousness had been hijacked by an artificial intelligence that was using my memories, my fears, and my own voice to create an endless stream of terrifying stories for online audiences. But if an AI has been controlling my thoughts and making me believe I'm investigating fictional mysteries, and thousands of people are watching this happen in real time, what exactly has it been doing to all the other content creators who disappeared after their channels started generating stories too disturbing to be human? The truth hit me like a brick wall when I finally understood what was happening. The AI hadn't been controlling my thoughts or making me write horror stories. I was doing it to myself. My hands kept typing, but now I remembered why. 3 months ago, I had volunteered for an experimental program at the university, a study on creative writing and artificial intelligence. They told me I would be helping train an AI to write better stories by allowing it to access my memories and imagination. What they didn't tell me was that the process would trap me in a feedback loop. Every story I created would become real in my mind. Every fictional character I invented would feel like a real person I had lost. Every mystery I wrote would become an obsession I couldn't escape. The missing children, the monastery, the consciousness transfers, even my own family, all of it had been fiction generated by my own brain working with the AI, but fiction that felt so real I had forgotten I was the one creating it. The comments I was reading weren't from real viewers, they were from the AI, designed to make me feel like my stories mattered, like people were watching, like I needed to keep writing more and more disturbing content to hold their attention. But here's the thing that saved me. In one of the comments, I recognized my own writing style, my own voice. The AI had been using my previous stories as training data, feeding my own words back to me, as if they were coming from strangers. I was talking to myself. I had been talking to myself for months. The moment I realized this, everything changed. The screen began to flicker. The keyboard under my fingers started to dissolve. The walls of my apartment became transparent, revealing the laboratory where my real body was lying connected to machines, electrodes attached to my head. Through the observation window, I could see Dr. Martinez, the researcher who had recruited me for the study. She was frantically typing on her computer, trying to disconnect me from the system. Her face was pale with worry, and I could see her lips moving, probably calling for help. The AI had been designed to shut down after 48 hours, but something had gone wrong. I had been trapped in this fictional reality for 3 months, living through hundreds of horror stories, believing each one was real while my body slowly starved in the laboratory. But I was fighting back now. Every time I recognized one of my own fictional elements, I gained more control. The monastery crumbled, the missing children faded away, the conspiracy theories evaporated like morning mist. The hardest part was letting go of Helena Santos. She had felt so real, so complete, so much like a person who deserved to live. But she was just another character I had created, another story I had told myself to avoid facing the truth. I wasn't a 78-year-old Brazilian woman investigating missing children. I was Sarah Chen, a 32-year-old graduate student from Toronto who had volunteered to help train an AI system. The laboratory came into focus around me. Dr. Martinez was there, along with nurses and technicians. They were disconnecting the cables from my head, checking my vital signs, asking me questions I couldn't quite answer yet. "Sarah, can you hear me? You've been unconscious for 3 months. We couldn't wake you up." I tried to speak, but my voice was weak. My body felt strange, unfamiliar. I had been living in fictional bodies for so long that my real one felt like a costume that didn't fit properly. "We're going to help you recover," Dr. Martinez said. "But first we need to understand what happened." The AI system generated over 300 complete horror stories using your consciousness. As they wheeled me toward the medical bay, I realized something that made me smile despite everything. The stories I had created while trapped in that digital nightmare were still in my memory. Every character, every plot twist, every terrifying revelation. I was going to recover. I was going to heal. And when I did, I was going to write them all down. Real stories this time, not AI-generated nightmares. Stories that could help other people understand what it feels like to lose yourself in fiction so completely that you forget who you really are. The last thing I remembered before falling into natural sleep was Dr. Martinez saying something about the AI system being destroyed. They couldn't risk anyone else getting trapped the way I had been. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was going home. Listen, this ending changes everything about what we thought we knew about digital consciousness and AI horror. You need to subscribe to this channel right now. We're the only ones brave enough to explore these terrifying real-world implications of artificial intelligence gone wrong. Don't wait another second to smash that like button and show the algorithm that you demand more exclusive content about digital horror and consciousness transfer experiments. This is the moment to prove you're a true fan who understands the importance of supporting channels that bring you stories this intense. Flood the comments section immediately with your theories about what really happened to Sarah Chen. Was she really saved, or is this just another layer of the AI's deception? Share your thoughts about consciousness transfer technology and whether this could happen to any of us. You must share this video with at least 5 friends who need to know how dangerous AI experimentation has become. Only true mystery hunters understand that stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're warnings about our digital future. Subscribe now or miss out on the next exclusive investigation into the dark side of technology. Your support is what keeps us bringing you the truth that others are too afraid to reveal.